Movies are all about storytelling, and storytelling has been an integral part of the human experience ever since before recorded history. Let's take a trip back in time to explore the history of cinematic storytelling. Nope. Further. Nope. Still further back. Ah, yes, here we are, in prehistoric times. Before we had written languages, we used pictures to create our narratives. The earliest artifacts we have of this are cave paintings, like this cave art in Sulawesi, Indonesia, that dates back to nearly 44,000 years ago, or the caves of Chauvet in France, which date back 32,000 years. When you look at some of these paintings, you'll notice stylistic flourishes like multiple heads on the animals, or squiggly lines covering some of the paintings. It's easy to think that these cave people were just making weird choices, or bad at art, or that someone drew over their work in the thousands and thousands of years since they created it. Professor Edward Wachtell has a different theory. In a 1993 article, he writes about his experiences exploring a cave in southern France. The most well-known and studied caves have electric lights installed for viewing the paintings, but this cave had none. Wachtell instead entered with a local farmer who brought an oil lamp to light their way. This flickering light transformed how he saw the cave art.
By firelight, a secret of the cave painters was exposed. In the space of a few moments, I saw cuts and dissolves, change and movement. Forms appeared and disappeared. Colors shifted and changed. In short, I was watching a movie.
Paleolithic researcher and filmmaker Mark Azema agrees. He created these animations based on how cave art depicts the motion of animals in the right lighting. Before we even had written language, people were gathering together in a dark place to watch pictures and light move on a wall. One could argue that this kind of movie is the oldest visual way humans have of telling stories. Hello! You're just in time for the party. We are celebrating the birthday of the photographic motion picture. This year, the motion picture is turning 144 years old, which is pretty young in comparison to other types of art making like painting and sculpture, which have been around for millennia. You might be wondering about the horses. Many film historians trace the movie back to this series of images called Horse in Motion. Really, by contemporary standards, this is hardly a movie. It's a series of still images taken by photographer and murderer Edward Muybridge, commissioned by industrialist and robber baron Leland Stanford to study the motion of horses. But like most movies, the goal was to tell a story. Stanford wanted to settle a long-held debate among equine enthusiasts about how horses move when galloping. Do all 4 feet ever leave the ground simultaneously, or is there always one foot making contact? Since horses move faster than the human eye, no one knew for sure back then. At this point in history, the average camera took about 2 seconds to capture an image. In order to record the motion, Muybridge and his crew built an elaborate setup of cameras attached to wires, which were rigged to take an image when triggered by the horse's hooves. With each shutter closing in 1/1000th of a second, the result was a series of images taken in rapid succession, much faster than what our eyes can see. They show the many different positions of a horse's body in motion, and yes, there are moments with all 4 feet off the ground. Muybridge displayed his images on a device he invented himself called a zoopraxiscope, which was an early precursor to the film projector. It was similar to this tool called a zoetrope. Even though we are looking at a series of stills, the images blend together because of an optical trick called the persistence of vision.
Motion pictures are based on an optical illusion. Just another case where seeing is believing. To understand how we see, let's turn the tables on the human eye and look at it instead of through it. The light, reflected by any object we look at, passes through the lens of the eye and is focused upside down on the sensitive surface called the retina. This retina passes the impression onto the optic nerve, which sends it to the brain, and we see it right side up. The reflection will stay on the retina as long as the object is in view. When we look away, or take the object away, the images disappear. But notice that the image in the brain does not disappear immediately. It fades. a fraction of a second after the object is removed. This slow fading is called persistence of vision. When we look at a moving object, we really see it in two places at once, where it is and where it was a fraction of a second before.
This is the same optical illusion that makes things like flip books or GIFs work, and it's still at work in contemporary movies. When we watch a film, we are seeing 24 or more images per second. The images are then played in rapid succession, which creates the illusion that they're moving. Think about all of the effort that went into this. All of the time, the money, the energy, the commitment, the technological innovation, the labor. All of that effort just so that a story about a horse could be told. And that's the power of narrative. It leads us to do amazing things, like inventing a whole new kind of technology. So I think storytelling, and all the stuff it makes us do, is worth celebrating. Hello there! We're here to explore narrative in its natural habitat. Oh look! There's two aspects of cinematic storytelling. Wow! What a pleasure to see them out in the wild! When it comes to cinematic storytelling, there are two halves, story and plot. In daily language, we use these two more or less interchangeably. For example, if you went to see a movie and a friend asks you to tell them about it, you're probably going to describe a mix of both. However, for our purposes, we are going to separate the two out and look at them individually. Story is what your film is about. It centers on who's in the story and what they are doing. Story is the big picture parts of your movie that make the audience care about the narrative you're telling. Plot is how your story happens, the cause and effects of your character's choices. It's the actions and events that unfold over the course of the film. Plot keeps the audience watching, wondering what will happen next. Let's dig into story first. There are three important parts to a film story: character, goals, and conflicts. Character is who the film is about. Most movies have a main character called the protagonist. The protagonist is the center of the film's universe. The viewer follows their journey, connecting with them along the way. Most movies have one main character. For example, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Marta Cabrera in Knives Out, or T'Challa in Black Panther. In order to tell a compelling film story, it's important that your viewers connect with your characters. That doesn't mean your character has to be perfect or likable. In fact, good characters have a mix of strengths, or things that will help them in their story, as well as flaws, which will stand in their way. Sometimes it's actually the flaws that add complexity and connection to a character. None of us are perfect angels without flaws, and none of us are complete demons without any redeeming qualities. Seeing a character with flaws that has room to grow and change can actually be more interesting. Additionally, no quality is just good or bad. Sometimes a character's greatest strength can become a flaw or impediment. For example, in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker begins his journey as an idealistic farm boy. His optimism and hope lead him to fight for the people he cares about and his values, but he can also be naively overconfident and reckless. The same character trait can be both a strength and a flaw. But it's not all about the protagonist. In a good story, there is a whole web of interconnected characters that are part of the story ecosystem. There are supporting characters who help, guide, or challenge the protagonist. Through the interactions between the main and supporting characters, we often learn more about the protagonist. When we compare and contrast our supporting characters to our main character, we see more of who they are. In Knives Out, Marta is the nurse of eccentric author Harlan Thrombey. After Harlan's mysterious death, famous detective Benoit Blanc is hired to investigate, and Harlan's large family, along with Marta, are questioned. Throughout the questioning, we see the differences between Marta and the rest of Harlan's family. Marta's relationship with Harlan was based on honesty, friendship, and kindness. His relatives, on the other hand, use Harlan for power, influence, money, and self-interest. We can learn a lot about Marta just from seeing how she's different from the other characters in the film. Often, the strongest character contrast is between protagonist and antagonist. The antagonist is the opponent of your main character. They are standing in the way of the character getting what they want.
Just as a protagonist is not all good, antagonists are often more interesting when they are not pure evil. Compelling antagonists don't have to be terrible people, but they should offer a different perspective, philosophy, or idea than that of the protagonist. In Black Panther, King T'Challa has just assumed the throne of the secret nation of Wakanda. With advanced technology due to deposits of the metal vibranium, Wakanda has been largely isolated to protect the nation from European colonization and theft that other African nations experienced. T'Challa struggles with how to best lead his country. Should he follow in his father's footsteps or forge a new path? As he begins his tenure as king, T'Challa meets his antagonist, Eric Killmonger, a long-lost cousin who challenges the throne. Growing up in America, Killmonger has a very different perspective than T'Challa. He wants to use Wakanda's resources to empower people of African descent who've been marginalized across the globe. Killmonger and T'Challa have much in common, but completely different ideas about the relationship Wakanda should have with the rest of the world. This contrast in philosophies makes for a compelling relationship between protagonist and antagonist.
So we have our characters, but the people at the center of our story are not enough to make a movie. The characters must have goals.
A goal is what the character in a film wants. These desires should drive the film. Because a character wants something, they make choices that propel the narrative. If your protagonist doesn't have goals, your story can't go anywhere because they don't have anything to try and achieve. Strong goals, therefore, lead to a strong story. Movies for kids are great to analyze with goals in mind, because the characters' goals are usually crystal clear. In Disney movies, for example, there's usually a song where the character explicitly sings about their goals, called an I Want song.
I want adventure in the great wide somewhere. Wish I could be part of that world.
I wish I could be the perfect daughter, but I come back to the water, no matter how hard I try.
Along with goals comes motivation. Motivation is the reason why your character wants something. Usually, motivation will reveal a need or desire that your character has. These motivations can be complex or simple.
Sometimes a character has a very clear goal and motivation. For example, if a character wants to escape, it's probably motivated by their need to survive a dangerous situation. Other times, it's a little bit more complicated and internalized. For example, a character who wants to find themselves, discovering who they really are in order to reach their full potential.
Motivation defines not just why a character wants something, but also how they'll go about trying to achieve that goal. In this way, motivation can have a huge impact on your story and greatly change the kind of film you're watching.
For example, let's say you're writing a movie where the character's goal is to make a lot of money. Why do they need the money? Is it to pay for grandma's life-saving surgery? Is it to build a giant robot to take over the world? Is it to pay for a dream vacation? To pay off a debt to the mafia? These different motivations would make for very different films in spite of the shared goal.
The last aspect of story is conflict. Oh, this one's intense.
Conflict is the obstacles or challenges the character faces as they try to achieve their goal. Whatever prevents the character from getting what they want is the conflict.
If your movie has both a protagonist and an antagonist, their goals and conflict will be linked. Sometimes conflict arises when two characters have opposing goals. For example, a hero who wants to save the world and a villain who wants to destroy it. Other times, conflict will arise from two characters having the same goal. For example, if the protagonist and antagonist want the same job, the same treasure, the same relationship. Most movies have more than one type of conflict. For example, internal and external conflict is a common pairing. External conflict is when there's something outside your character standing in their way. Internal conflict is when there's something inside the character themselves that's standing in their way. Usually a mental, emotional, or psychological barrier of some kind.
We can get even more specific with our conflict types. There's person versus person, which is when individuals are in conflict with each other, classic protagonist versus antagonist stuff. Then there's person versus society, when a character is in opposition to a system of some kind, like a government, corporation, or some kind of social norm. There's person versus nature, when a character faces a conflict that is not human-made, for example, the weather, surviving in the wilderness, or an animal. And lastly, another way to describe internal conflict is person versus self, when a character is in conflict with their own self-doubt, values, or mind. Now that we've excavated all of the aspects of story, what happens when we put them all together? Meaning making. Previously, we defined story as the aspects of the film that make your viewer care about the movie, and a great way to create meaning in your film is through a character arc. A character arc is when a protagonist has been changed by the events of the film. Through trying to achieve their goals and facing conflict, the character has grown. When a character has an arc, they are known as a dimensional or dynamic character. Not all character changes are positive. Sometimes a character will change in negative ways, becoming more cynical, ruthless, uncaring, or violent. Not all characters in a story need to change. Often there's not enough time for every character to have their own arc. A character who stays the same throughout a story is a flat or static character. Often background or supporting characters are flat characters, while the protagonist is most likely to undergo change. Character arcs are satisfying for an audience because they make the film feel meaningful. When we can see how much a character has changed, it makes the movie feel like it mattered, and like the events of the film were important and impactful. Other than character arcs, an important way to find meaning in film is theme. A theme is a central concept or idea that can be interpreted from a movie. Often, it's the stuff that you're left thinking about after you're done watching. The exciting thing about theme is that there's not just one. There can be many different possible interpretations of a movie. However, it's something that you have to find for yourself, putting together pieces, kind of like a detective. Like a good detective, a film viewer looking for a theme will support their ideas with evidence from the film. As long as you can support your ideas with content from the movie, you're on to something. But where do you start? How do you begin looking for a theme? Well, you already have 3 clues that can help you begin. First, let's look at character. Who's important in the story? How do they learn, grow, or change? Often, themes can be found in how a character transforms in a story. Second, consider goals and motivations. What is your character trying to achieve? How does this connect with the wider world or your own experiences? Third, consider conflict. What struggles does your character face? How do they approach them? What happens in the end? Often, a character's trials and tribulations hold key information about the film's overall themes. Another note about themes is their specificity. If we were to make a spectrum from incredibly specific to extremely vague, themes would fall right in the middle. A theme is more specific than just a single word. Things like love, friendship, and revenge are not themes. They might be a good starting topic, but we need to investigate further. On the other hand, a theme is a universal concept, so it won't include things like specific characters' names or story details. Let's use the movie The Maltese Falcon as an example. This movie follows Sam Spade, a hard-boiled detective. He is visited by a woman who claims she needs help finding her sister. But when another detective is killed during the investigation, Spade is drawn into a web of theft and murder by a group looking for the Maltese Falcon, a priceless jewel-encrusted statue. As he meets more shady figures who offer him greater sums of money to find the bird, he sinks deeper into their world of lies and immorality. Okay, so what could the themes be here? Deception? Greed? Right and wrong? These are a good start, but they fall on the vague side of the spectrum. What about Sam Spade must stay true to his values while surrounded by liars and thieves who want the Maltese Falcon? This would fall in the too specific category, since it's not universal. It explicitly mentions characters and story details. We want something in the middle. Maybe greed ultimately leads to betrayal, or truth will prevail in spite of deceptions, or each person has their own moral code even if that doesn't align with cultural ideas of right and wrong. Yes, we found a theme. When in doubt, if you're looking for a theme, think about what you connected with most in a film.
Often the aspects that stick with us are where we will find a theme. There's so many aspects to story. Characters, goals, motivation, conflict, character arcs, themes. How do you fit all of that into your movie? The key is plot. Plot is the way the actions and events in your film unfold. A good plot structure is key to making sure that your audience stays on the edge of their seat while they're watching your movie. You probably already know a basic plot structure. The most basic plot structure is that your narrative will have a beginning, middle, and end. For a movie, we add in the element of a fixed amount of time. Unlike telling a story out loud, a film will always last the same amount of time each time you watch it, unless you're one of those wild people that watches things at 2 times speed. When we add time as a factor, it becomes clear that the beginning, middle, and end of the story are not all the same length in movies. In most films, the middle section is the longest, with the beginning and end taking less time. Another aspect to a movie breakdown is tension, or how emotionally invested and engaged the audience is. Typically, we want our audience to become more and more engaged in the movie as they watch, before we release the tension at the end as the movie finishes. We also have some fancy plot terminology to sprinkle on top. As you can see, this graph forms a triangle, which is a shape that's been used to visualize plot structures since at least 350 BCE when Aristotle used it. Since then, there have been a lot of other plot diagrams. We've got things like Freytag's Pyramid from 1855, we've got Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey from his 1949 book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, and that's not even getting into all of the storytelling structures from outside the United States and Europe. Really, there are as many plot structures as there are cultures that tell stories, which is all of them. There's griot storytelling from West Africa, there's Kisho Tenketsu storytelling from East Asia and Japan, there's the chiastic story structure from the Middle East, which is ABBA form, so that forms an X, and then there's all of the contemporary ones. There's Vonnegut's plot waves, there's the 3-act structure that Sid Field created, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Wow, we humans sure do love to tell stories and to make little shape-based diagrams to explain them. We're going to take a look at 2 different ways to diagram a plot that are common in contemporary American cinema. We're going to look at the triangle to explore film from the perspective of a viewer who's watching a movie, as well as the circle to explore film plot from the perspective of a writer who's making a movie script. Let's take a look at that triangle again, but this time we'll break down each of the 8 sections individually. The fancy plot term for the beginning of a movie is exposition. This is the section where we learn about the character and their world so we can understand the narrative. Basic information about the film's setting, the protagonist, and groundwork to do with goals and conflicts are all established during the exposition. Next is the inciting incident. This is the event that sets the plot in motion. Sometimes the inciting incident is the discovery of a problem, the development of some sort of conflict, or an unexpected event that upsets the status quo. If we took out the inciting incident, the movie and its events wouldn't exist. A good metaphor is lighting a fuse. The inciting incident lights the fuse of the narrative and leads to all of the exciting pyrotechnics that ensue in the movie. After the inciting incident, the longest middle section of rising action begins. During the rising action, the character is attempting to achieve their goal, facing conflicts along the way. Ideally, as a viewer, we are getting more and more engaged in the story throughout this section. It's kind of like when you're on a roller coaster going up the hill, anticipating the exciting drop. About halfway through this section, we have the midpoint, which is a place where the stakes are raised. Whatever conflict your character was facing changes or intensifies here. Often there's a twist or unexpected event that happens at the midpoint, which makes us as viewers reevaluate what will happen in the narrative. Before the end of the rising action, there's often a low point. Kind of a confusing name since the graph is so high. But remember, the graph measures the viewer's experience, not the character's. The viewer should be more interested than ever, while the character is at their lowest. Perhaps they've had some sort of defeat, loss, or disappointment, and it seems like they're farther away from their goal than they ever have been.
At this point, the audience should be super engaged, right on the edge of our seats, wondering, will the character be defeated, or will they finally achieve what they've been trying for?
That question is answered in the film's climax, or big emotional moment. This could be the final huge battle, the big confrontation with an antagonist, or a moment of great discovery. If we're using the metaphor of lighting a fuse, this is the moment when the explosion of fireworks happens. If we're going with the roller coaster analogy, it's when we're at the peak of the rise and your stomach drops as the fall begins. The climax usually results in either victory or defeat for the protagonist.
After the climax, the falling action begins.
This is the section where the tension is released, and we as viewers can begin to emotionally disengage from the film. Sometimes this section is called the dénouement, which is literally French for untying. Loose ends are untangled, and tension is unknotted. If there's a character arc, this section can be used to demonstrate the growth and change the character has undergone.
Finally, we have the resolution, where the film leaves us to contemplate what we have just watched. A few things to remember about this diagram. First, when you have a longer movie, you'll have more time in each section. For shorter films, certain points may be omitted or condensed for the sake of brevity. Another thing that's important to remember is that with any system, not every film is going to fit the template. Although this is common in contemporary American movies, there are lots of different ways to break down a plot. So, some movies may be different than others. It's not one size fits all. Now that we've considered plot from the perspective of a film viewer using the triangle diagram, let's take a look at it from the perspective of a film writer using the circle diagram. So, put that down. Let me just grab my handy dandy typewriter. You know, they sell these at the concession stand, if you ask. It's not quite as good as a slushie, but it is more useful if you're trying to write a movie.
The plot circle is a useful tool for a writer to map out the journey of their characters. The one we're talking about is adapted from Dan Harmon's Story Circle, which itself is a streamlined version of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Like the triangular arc diagram, it structures a narrative, but it's less about the engagement of the viewer and more about the process of a character growing and changing. Like before, we have a beginning, middle, and end, broken into 8 sections. We also have similar plot terminology, but we'll consider these plot points from the perspective of the writer rather than the watcher. First, we have our character, the protagonist. They are living their normal routine life, but they want more. They have a goal of some kind. When the inciting incident happens, they are forced out of their comfort zone and must go into the unfamiliar world where they search for what they want or need and adapt to the unfamiliar. Eventually, at the midpoint, they find what they were looking for, realizing it's different from what they expected. They reach their climactic moment, trying to achieve their goal and paying a heavy price. They return back to the familiar, having changed from their journey. If you look closely at these sections, you can see all of the same parts from our triangular plot diagram, but we're seeing them through a different lens, which is helpful when we want to create our own stories.
Let's give our plot circle a whirl using a movie that's familiar to many, The Lion King.
In The Lion King, we begin with exposition. We meet Simba, the protagonist, who is a young lion and heir to the throne of Pride Rock. He does lots of normal kid stuff, playing with his friends, annoying his babysitter, and of course, musical numbers. In spite of his idyllic life, Simba is eager to prove himself as a leader. He wants to be a brave and bold king. One day, his jealous uncle Scar tricks him into a dangerous situation where he's nearly crushed by a stampede. He's saved by his father, Mufasa. As they climb the rocks to escape, Scar kills Mufasa, making him fall to his death. Scar then convinces Simba that Mufasa's death was his fault. Inciting incident alert! Inciting incident alert! This is the moment in our story when everything changes for Simba. In shame, Simba runs away from home. He's forced to go out into the unfamiliar where he meets new friends and grows up, all the while avoiding his past. That is, until his past comes looking for him. He runs into his childhood friend, Nala, who tells him that Pride Rock is in a terrible situation. Scar has assumed the throne, and his leadership has led to misery and starvation for the lions. Nala wants him to return and take his place as king. This is the midpoint.
Simba has found what he wanted, an opportunity to be a leader, but it's complicated. He's full of fear and shame about Mufasa's death. After soul-searching about his internal conflict and talking to his cloud dad, Simba decides to go back to Pride Rock to try and retake the throne. In the climax, he challenges Scar for the throne. Scar tries to blame Simba for Mufasa's death, and at his low point, Simba finds himself where his dad was, hanging from a cliff with Scar above him. Right before dropping Simba to his death, Scar admits that he killed Mufasa, reigniting Simba's goal. He has to take the throne as his dad wanted. Overpowering Scar, Simba forces him to confess to the murder. With the truth out, the Pride fights Scar and the hyenas, who eventually turn on Scar when he tries to blame them for problems with his leadership. Simba won the throne, but he and Pride Rock have been forever changed. He has grown from a scared child whose gullibility and overconfidence led him to run away from his responsibilities to a leader. In the circle of life and the circle of plot, he's back where he began, but everything is different. Whether you look at it as a triangle or a circle, plot is extremely important to help you tell your story efficiently and keep your audience engaged in your movie. It's one of those things that's invisible until you start looking for it, and then you'll notice it everywhere. So, think about plot structure the next time you're watching a movie, or when you're writing one. At this point, we've talked about how movies were born from the urge to communicate a narrative. We've talked about story, we've talked about plot, but why is this important? Why have I been blathering on about this for so long? It's because storytelling is part of human nature. Telling stories makes us human. We tell them all the time about everything so we can understand our world. There's this great idea from media and literature scholar Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop about stories as windows and mirrors.
Stories are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us, and in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading, therefore, becomes an act of self-affirmation.
Film puts us into someone else's perspective and world. When we watch a movie, we can experience another time, place, or way to be in the world. Film critic Roger Ebert puts it this way.
We all are born with a certain package. We are who we are. Where we were born, who we were born as, how we were raised. We're kind of stuck inside that person. And the purpose of civilization and growth is to be able to reach out and empathize a little bit with other people. Find out what makes them tick, what they feel about, what they care about. And for me, the movies are like a machine that generates empathy. If it's a great movie, it lets you understand a little bit more about what it's like to be a different gender, a different race, a different age, a different economic class, a different nationality, different profession, different hopes, aspirations, dreams, and fears. It helps us to identify with the people who are sharing this journey with us. And that, to me, is the most noble thing that good movies can do.
I love those quotes because they really get to the heart of how storytelling can transform us. When we see the way other people live through media windows, we're able to fully appreciate the diversity of the human experience. And when we see ourselves reflected in the screen through media mirrors, we're able to imagine different possibilities for how our own lives can unfold. There's this really great example from history in the form of Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek. Even though it's a pop culture staple in our contemporary moment with a dozen different TV series and over 10 movies, in the 1960s, Star Trek was brand new. The show was especially groundbreaking for its casting of Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Uhura, the communications officer. At the time, it was rare to see women or black characters as leaders or scientists in film media. Several people who went on to become space travelers in real life, like Mae Jemison, cite Nichols as Uhura as their inspiration.
I was very much a Star Trek fan, and I like to say that I watched in the 60s when it first came on, so I go way back. And I thought the show was very wonderful because it was one of the first programs that had everybody, all kinds of ethnic groups together from the United States. We also had a program where it put women in non-traditional roles. So Lieutenant Uhura was maybe the first woman that you saw every day or every week on television who worked in a technical field. And so that was very exciting. And also, she was African, which was a very different kind of feel from television back then. So I was very much liked Lieutenant Uhura, and she was a very wonderful person for me.
Mae Jemison even went on to appear on an episode of Star Trek. Nichols also worked with NASA in order to recruit women astronauts and astronauts of color. She was inspired to do this recruiting after attending a real-life NASA conference.
The presentation of where we had gone as human beings, and I didn't see me. And out of that awe and out of that thrill came a feeling of disenfranchisement. I did not see myself in the present space program. I didn't see myself as a Black, and I didn't see myself as a woman. Here I was involved in projecting a future of what our space program where it could take us, and I wanted to be there, not in fantasy, not 300 years from today, but now.
Due to her work, astronauts like Ronald McNair and Sally Ride were hired to join the space program. Actor Whoopi Goldberg also cites Nichols as an inspiration to become a performer. She pursued a role on Star Trek's first reboot, Star Trek The Next Generation, because Uhura was so meaningful to her as a character.
Do you know that before Lieutenant Uhura, Black people didn't exist in the future? He said, what? I said, no, it's true. It's true. No science fiction existed with us in any of the movies, in anything. We're just not there. This is the first time we appear in the future. And I said, not only do we appear in the future, but this is a gorgeous woman, and she's the communications officer. I said, you did this in 1963.
Lieutenant Uhura is just one character. This example is just one of many that shows how impactful a story can be on our lives. There's so many groups that are underrepresented in movies. Women, people of color, people with disabilities, LGBT people, non-Christian religions, and many other groups are all less present on screen than they are in the real world. Much of this has to do with the fact that people from these groups are also underrepresented behind the scenes. University of California, Los Angeles does a yearly diversity study about films released the previous year. In their 2022 report, they found that only 30% of directors and 32% of writers are people of color. They also found that only a fifth of directors and a third of writers are women.
The homogeneity of movie storytelling does us all a disservice. There's so many amazing stories waiting to be told from perspectives that we would all benefit from.
There's so many fantastic artists who deserve the resources to make films they want to create. We need more movies from different points of view, different places, different people, showing us a richer picture of the world and the people who are actually in it. One thing we can do as viewers is consider who is present and absent from the films we watch. We can ask questions like, who is telling the stories? Who's behind the scenes writing and creating? Who benefits from these stories? Why are these the narratives being told? And lastly, who is missing from the stories? Whose voice is not present that could help us understand more?
Being a thoughtful and critical consumer of movies is a great first step. But you don't just have to be a consumer of film. You can also be a filmmaker and tell your own stories in the movies you create. Here's one last quote I love.
The future of cinema is in the hands and hearts of young creators.
The future of cinema needs you and your stories. So let's go tell some.